The secret nobody tells. They say that to win a millionaire, you need to be born lucky, have magazine cover good looks, and a family name that spans 5 generations. But what if all of this is a lie? What if what truly wins a powerful man isn't what the world says, but what almost no one dares to teach? Most women spend their lives trying to be perfect enough to be chosen, and don't realize that this keeps them away from the very men who could truly value them. While some shrink, thinking they're not good enough, others cloak themselves in arrogance, trying to compensate for the emptiness they feel inside. Neither succeeds, because what these men seek isn't perfection, it's presence. It's not luxury, it's lightness. It's not beauty. It's the radiance of someone who knows their own worth. That's why so many seemingly ordinary women win the hearts of millionaires, while so many others, who seem to have it all, remain alone. The difference lies in what doesn't show in the mirror, the mindset, the posture, and the energy they convey without saying a word. You might think this world isn't for you, but maybe you've just learned the wrong map. What if, instead of trying to impress, you could learn to be unforgettable? This manual won't teach you to fake it or use cheap tricks. It'll show you how to become that rare woman. A high-value man never lets slip away. And the most interesting thing? You don't have to change who you are. You just need to forget everything you've been taught about love and start over. This time, the right way. Since childhood, Isadora heard phrases that stuck like chewing gum. Rich men are only interested in perfect women. You have to be born with a silver spoon in your mouth to live in this world. These men don't want commitment, just fun. These were words uttered by aunts at the lunch table, by neighbors in whispers, and even by her own mother who, with the best of intentions, tried to protect her from disappointment. But the effect was the opposite. They planted the fear of dreaming too big. How many times, upon seeing an elegant woman crossing the street in designer heels and a confident smile, did Isadora think, "That's not for me," unaware that she was already beginning to exclude herself from a world she didn't even know? The truth is, these beliefs act like invisible fences. They don't scream, they don't knock. They just take hold and dictate the limits of what a woman believes she deserves. How many incredible women avoid going to certain places, talking to certain people, or even dressing more confidently because they think they'll look forced? Self-sabotage in this context is silent, and therefore dangerous. The human mind tends to seek evidence that confirms its beliefs. And if someone believes they're not worthy of living alongside a successful man, they'll find proof in every rejection, every unanswered message, every indifferent glance they receive. It took Isadora years to realize that the problem wasn't with millionaire men, nor fate, nor some genetic curse, but with the mental script she followed as if it were a universal law. That's when a friend told her about a podcast that interviewed wives of renowned businessmen. She heard stories of women who grew up in poor neighborhoods, attended public schools, and still built solid marriages with extremely successful men. That shattered a foundation. If they could do it, why couldn't she? For the first time, Isadora wondered if the impossible was nothing more than a poorly told story. The false rules of the game. It's curious how society creates unwritten rules that everyone follows, even without knowing who invented them. One of these rules states that common women don't belong in the world of high-class men. As if there were a secret club with a password, a noble surname, and a golden ticket. But just look closely. Many of these men don't fall in love with the prettiest woman in the room, nor the youngest, nor the richest. What fascinates them is something much rarer: presence, confidence, and uniqueness. They live surrounded by people eager to impress them, and therefore what wins them over is precisely those who don't try to force anything. Once at a charity event, Isadora saw this firsthand. While dozens of women paraded expensive dresses and practiced smiles, a famous investor was captivated by a girl in a simple dress who listened more than she spoke and laughed with her eyes. She wasn't competing, wasn't trying to stand out. She was just there, completely, with a lightness that clashed with the tension around her. This was a shock to Isadora. Perhaps the game wasn't about having, but about being. It wasn't about appearing sophisticated, but about being so self-assured that she didn't need to prove anything to anyone. That's why breaking limiting beliefs requires courage to swim against the tide. While the world screams that only a specific type of woman can win a millionaire, we need to silence the noise and listen to our own intuition. And this isn't empty motivational speech. Neuroscience has already shown that our beliefs shape our decisions, and therefore, our results. If a woman believes she's worthy of being among the greats, she'll behave accordingly. Hold her head high, watch her posture, read about the topics they discuss, and frequent the places they hang out. Over time, this new behavior naturally attracts those who share the same wavelength. Rewriting your own script, Isadora began a personal experiment. For 21 days, she would write down every negative phrase that came to mind about herself, and alongside them create positive, realistic versions. I'm not pretty enough became, my beauty lies in the unique way I present myself to the world. Rich men just want fun became high value. Men seek women who bring peace and true partnership. This simple exercise began to change her tone of voice, her body language, even her look in the mirror. She realized that beliefs are like mental apps. If they're outdated, just uninstall and install new ones. Furthermore, she began to connect with inspiring role models. She began reading biographies of women who rose through the ranks with intelligence and purpose. Estée Lauder, Oprah Winfrey, Sarah Blakely. She watched interviews, analyzing how they spoke, how they carried themselves, what they valued. This wasn't to imitate them, but to remind herself daily that it's possible to forge unlikely paths with a clear vision and emotional consistency. Each story was like a spark. It showed that there was no official profile of a woman worthy of living alongside a great man. Only women who refused to accept imposed labels. Little by little, Isadora noticed her energy shifting. Friends said she was more radiant. Colleagues began to listen to her more attentively, and even strangers seemed more receptive. It was as if, by shedding the beliefs that were holding her back, she began to occupy more space, not physically but in life. And this is the first invisible step that almost no one mentions. Before entering the world of millionaires, you have to believe you belong there. When the mind opens this door, previously hidden paths begin to reveal themselves. And it was precisely at that moment that a new universe began to emerge on Isadora's horizon, silent and full of its own codes, ready to be deciphered. But understanding this universe would require much more than self-confidence. She would have to learn to think like them. Understanding the world of millionaires, a universe with its own codes. When Isadora began attending her first business events, she felt like a tourist in a foreign country. The conversations revolved around investments, international travel, company mergers, philanthropic projects, and even works of art. And it all seemed to be happening on another planet. It wasn't that the people were cold or arrogant, but there was a unique rhythm, a distinct language, almost like a silent dance where every gesture carried meaning. As she observed, she realized that the mistake many women make is trying to enter this world, using the foreign repertoire, without learning the cultural language that underpinned it. Millionaires, the real ones, not the ones who just flaunt it, value much more than luxury. They value time, discretion, strategy, long-term vision, and above all, people who add to their wealth, not drain it. They're accustomed to being courted, flattered, and surrounded by those who want a piece of what they have. So they develop a kind of radar for intentions. They're not easily impressed by beauty, status, or ostentation, because these are already part of their daily lives. What truly catches their eye is someone who brings lightness and intelligence at the same time. Someone who enters a room without trying to dominate, but also without shrinking. It was with this explorer's perspective that Isadora began to study the map of this universe. Instead of trying to fit in, she began observing patterns, how they greeted each other, how long they stayed in each conversation, how they managed their time with almost military precision. She discovered, for example, that many avoided talking about money in public and rarely displayed their brands ostentatiously, the opposite of what she imagined. Understanding this code made her relax. She didn't need to appear rich. She just needed to become interesting to those who already have everything. And that started with a skill she could develop: genuine curiosity. Where are they and what do they do there? One of the biggest myths Isadora believed was that millionaires lived hidden away in unattainable mansions. But over time, she realized they move around a lot. They're just not where most people look. Instead of noisy clubs and over-the-top parties, they frequent more exclusive and functional venues, charity auctions, networking events, golf clubs, art galleries, private dinners, innovation forums, and lectures on investment or philanthropy. And curiously, they tend to be extremely punctual and discreet. Their ostentation happens silently, a Mont Blanc pen in a pocket, a Patek Philippe watch hidden under a sleeve, a restrained smile that says, "I know who I am. I don't need to prove it." It was in one of these settings that Isadora learned her first practical lesson. To be noticed, you first have to be present. And to be present, you have to know where to be. She created a list of public events where she knew high-profile entrepreneurs would be. Technology conferences, trade shows, investment events, and even horse races. She wasn't going to hunt for millionaires, but to acclimate herself to the ecosystem, understand the unspoken codes, and absorb the atmosphere. At first, she was nervous and silent, but over time, she began to strike up simple conversations, like asking opinions on a panel or praising the event's organization. These small talk was gold. She discovered that many millionaires love to talk about their projects, but rarely find anyone who truly listens. While others tried to impress them, Isadora let them shine, and that made her memorable. She didn't need to compete for the spotlight. She just needed to hold the torch for those already on stage. Gradually, she began to be invited to other circles, like private dinners and more private gatherings. It was as if she were passing through invisible portals, where each invitation was a silent password saying, "You understand how this world works." The mindset that moves them, Isadora's greatest discovery, however, wasn't in places or objects, but in mindset. Millionaires think differently, and that's what got them to where they are. They value efficiency, delegation, planning, and above all, return on investment. This includes time, energy, and relationships. When they choose someone to be close to, they don't do it out of charity, but because they perceive that person as adding value, whether intellectual, emotional, or strategic. That's why they connect more with those who offer emotional stability than with those who bring only fleeting beauty. It was while discreetly listening to conversations at a cocktail party that Isadora noticed something revealing. While others talked about things they wanted to buy, they talked about problems they wanted to solve. While many live to consume, they live to build. While many live for the now, they live for the later. This long-term vision also applies to love. A high-value man seeks a woman who brings peace, confidence, and encourages growth, not someone who thrives on drama and insecurity. This isn't because they're cold, but because they live under constant pressure and need people who make them breathe deeply, not lose their breath. This realization changed everything for Isadora. Instead of thinking, "How can I win him over?" she began to think, "How can I add to someone's life like that?" And this shift in question also changed her behavior. She began reading about investments, entrepreneurship, emotional intelligence, and even business etiquette. Not to impress, but to understand his world, like someone learning the language of a new country. Because that's what the world of millionaires truly is. A country with its own laws, which rewards those who dedicate themselves to understanding it, and ignores those who merely try to show off. But understanding the language of this world was not enough. She would now need to become a woman of visible high value in this universe. Building a high-value image, the reflection that the world sees, Isadora realized that, in the world of millionaires, the way someone presents themselves is the first filter. Not because they value vanity, but because image communicates mindset. It wasn't about having expensive clothes, but about conveying coherence between what she said and what she appeared to be. For a long time, she believed that authenticity meant dressing any old way, as if appearance were superficial. But she discovered that, for those who live surrounded by strategic decisions, image is a sign of discipline, organization, and attention to detail. And those who convey chaos on the outside rarely convince that there will be order on the inside. That's when she decided to start with the basics, taking care of herself, like someone caring for a valuable project. She created a simple but consistent self-care routine: well-groomed hair, hydrated skin, clean and neutral nails, upright posture, and clothes that aligned with her body and surroundings. It wasn't about luxury. It was about politeness. She began choosing pieces in sober tones, quality fabrics, and timeless cuts. She abandoned clothes that screamed for attention and began investing in looks that whispered elegance. Interestingly, over time, even her gait changed. Firmer, more fluid, more self-possessed. This outward transformation had a silent and powerful effect. People began to treat her differently. Co-workers listened to her opinions more attentively. Clerks in luxury stores offered more attention, and even strangers were more solicitous. Not because she had become beautiful, but because her image said, "I respect myself." It was this self-respect that drew attention, and that's precisely what high-value men notice first. For them, appearance is like the cover of a book. It doesn't guarantee a good book, but it reveals the care the author took with the content. The posture that imposes presence. A high-value image isn't just about aesthetics. It's about presence. Isadora learned that presence isn't about speaking loudly. It's about knowing when to speak. It's not about dominating the room. It's about knowing how to fill it with confident silence. She began observing women who naturally stood out at events and noticed a pattern. They didn't chase attention, but attention always found them. How? Body language. Open shoulders, firm steps, direct gaze, a slight smile. A rare balance between softness and firmness. It was as if they were saying without words, "I know who I am and I don't need to prove it." She practiced in front of the mirror before important events, practicing maintaining eye contact while listening, controlling anxious gestures and adjusting her tone of voice. She also began practicing in everyday situations, ordering coffee, greeting doormen, chatting with colleagues. It was a silent laboratory. Gradually, this posture stopped being an effort and became a part of her. Even her energy changed. People began to step aside as she passed, not out of fear, but out of respect. It was the kind of presence that makes any millionaire pay attention, even without understanding why. A curious detail. The more confident she felt, the less she needed to talk about herself. Instead of trying to prove her own worth, she began to value others. And this paradoxically made her more interesting. Because in the world of powerful men, everyone wants to be noticed. So those who offer this space without vying for the spotlight become rare. Isadora realized that high-value posture is not built by trying to be admired, but by learning to admire others without diminishing yourself. This is the kind of quiet elegance that is achieved without apparent effort. The lifestyle that sustains the image Isadora also understood that a high-value image cannot survive without behind-the-scenes coherence. There was no point in appearing organized if her life was chaos. She then began building a lifestyle that reflected discipline and refinement, not luxury, but order. She established fixed times for waking up, working, studying, and self-care. She learned to cook simple, healthy dishes, decorated her apartment with fresh flowers, soft scents, and well-organized books. She created small rituals that conveyed to herself that she was a woman of value. Drinking tea in the afternoon, keeping her desk clean, writing in a gratitude journal before bed. She began to carefully choose the places she frequented: charming cafes, quiet bookstores, cultural events, art exhibitions, walks in leafy parks. It wasn't pretense. It was construction. She also began surrounding herself with people with a growth mindset, who talked about ideas instead of gossip, about plans instead of problems. This change in environment changed the way she thought, and consequently, how she presented herself. She realized that image isn't just what others see, but what you convey when you think no one is looking. The consequence was inevitable. Her presence began to make an impact even before she said a word. Successful men began to approach her spontaneously, curious about this woman who seemed to shine silently. She no longer needed to force connections. They simply happened. Because now when they looked at her, they saw more than beauty. They saw value. And that's when Isadora understood the secret no one tells. Getting attention is easy, but maintaining fascination requires consistency. But to maintain that allure, she would need to develop something even more powerful than image. The right mindset. Right mindset. Developing an abundance mindset. The invisible turn that changes everything. For a long time, Isadora believed that a wealth mindset meant knowing how to invest or making a lot of money. But when she spent time with successful men and women, she realized something surprising. True wealth begins before money. It begins with the way we think. While she worried about what she lacked, they talked about what they could create. While she feared losing, they planned to multiply. It was a pattern. Those who think with scarcity act with fear. Those who think with abundance act with courage. And in relationships, this makes all the difference. Because no one wants to share their life with someone who lives in survival mode. It was then that she began to observe her own thoughts, like someone monitoring traffic in a chaotic city. She realized her mind was filled with hidden phrases. I'm not good enough. He'll realize I don't belong in this world. If I show too much of myself, they'll reject me. These ideas weren't facts. They were echoes of old insecurities. But they controlled her decisions like invisible puppets. With every invitation she declined out of fear. With every opportunity she let pass. She was confirming these limiting beliefs and reinforcing the cycle of scarcity. To break this pattern, Isadora created a daily ritual. Every morning she wrote down 3 things she was grateful for, 3 recent achievements, and 3 qualities she admired in herself. At first it seemed trivial, but within a few weeks she began to notice that she walked straighter, smiled more, and felt more deserving of good things. Gratitude, she realized, wasn't a spiritual cliché. It was a powerful psychological strategy. Those who recognize what they already have begin to behave as if they have more to offer. And it's precisely this energy that high-value men identify from afar. Women who don't beg for love, but exude presence. The end of emotional neediness. The abundance mindset also transformed the way Isadora viewed relationships. Before, she thought she needed to prove her worth to be chosen. Now, she understood that she didn't need to convince anyone she was worthy of love. She just needed to live in a way that made that love a consequence, not a trophy. This shift was a game changer. She stopped competing with other women and started rooting for them. Because she understood that one woman's success doesn't threaten another's. This inner security made her magnetic. Because successful men sense when a woman is at peace with who she is. She also began to set healthy boundaries, something that had previously terrified her. When someone canceled a date at the last minute, instead of pretending everything was fine, she calmly stated that she valued punctuality. When a suitor displayed manipulative behavior, she walked away without drama, without needing to justify it too much. She discovered that saying no firmly, but without rudeness, was an act of self-love that elevated her value in the eyes of others. After all, if she didn't treat herself with respect, who would? And this quiet self-validation was something high-profile men deeply admired, because it revealed that she wasn't there out of necessity, but by choice. One of the exercises that helped her was the scarcity test. Every time she felt anxious to please someone, she asked herself, am I doing this out of love or fear of loss? If the answer was fear, she took a breath and backed away. Over time, this habit broke a long-held pattern of constantly seeking approval. Now she didn't need to be chosen, she chose. And this role reversal, so simple and so powerful, made her naturally stand out on the radar of men seeking a secure partner. Not an emotionally dependent one. Thinking like empire builders, the biggest transformation, however, came when Isadora began to think like the men she admired. They didn't see problems, they saw projects. They didn't see flaws, they saw prototypes. They didn't see risks, they saw potential returns. Inspired by this, she began to cultivate long-term thinking in all areas of her life. She began studying personal finance, opened a small investment portfolio, and read books like The Richest Man in Babylon and Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and began planning the next 5 years with clear goals. Not because he wanted to compete with them financially, but because he wanted to vibrate on the same frequency as those who build, not just consume. This mindset also influenced her daily choices. Instead of compulsively spending to impress, she began investing in personal development courses, mentoring, and cultural experiences that broadened her repertoire. She asked herself before every decision, does this bring me closer or further away from the woman I want to be? This simple question became her guiding light, and with each consistent step, her self-confidence grew, and with it her natural attractiveness, because nothing is more seductive to a high-value man than a woman with her own vision, who walks confidently even when alone. It was at that point that Isadora understood. The abundance mindset isn't about having, it's about being. It's living with the silent certainty that there will always be more opportunities, more connections, more love, and that there's no need to beg for anything, just to become valuable enough to be inevitable. And this certainty was like a rare perfume, invisible, yet impossible to ignore. But there would be no point in having this inner strength if she didn't know how to express it, and that's where the art of communicating like an unforgettable woman came in. Communication that delights and influences, a voice that opens doors. Isadora always believed that to win someone over, you had to say the right things. But when observing the most admired women in the circles she frequented, she noticed a detail that changed everything. It wasn't what they said, but how they said it. They spoke calmly, with strategic pauses and a tone that seemed to lull their words. They didn't interrupt. They didn't try to win arguments. They didn't rush out of nervousness. And curiously, they were the ones who received the most attention. That's when he understood that charming communication is like music. It doesn't depend on volume, but on melody. Determined to master this art, Isadora began recording her own voice to analyze its tone and rhythm. She realized that she sometimes spoke too quickly, which conveyed anxiety, so she began practicing short pauses, deep breaths before responding, and a slight smile in her voice, that almost imperceptible curve that makes any sentence warmer. She also began observing nonverbal language, firm eye contact, straight posture, soft gestures, because in the world of powerful men, 80% of communication happens before the first word. One exercise that helped her was the mirror of influence. In each conversation, she asked herself if she was making the person feel valued. She asked open-ended questions, listened with genuine interest, and avoided telling stories just to impress. She discovered that the less she tried to shine, the more light she received. Because high-value men are used to hearing speeches, but rarely find someone who truly listens to them, and those who make them feel heard inevitably become unforgettable. The elegance of knowing how to position yourself over time. Isadora realized that charming communication isn't just about sweetness, it's about elegant firmness. It's not enough to be pleasant. You need to know how to say no without creating friction, express opinions confidently without seeming arrogant, and disagree gracefully. She began practicing this in small situations, like correcting a wrong order at a restaurant or defending an idea in a work meeting. Instead of saying "you're wrong," she would use phrases like, "I understand your point, but I see it differently," and present her argument calmly. The impact was immediate. People listened to her with more respect. She also developed the habit of preparing catchphrases for social situations, something that seemed small but avoided awkward silences. When she didn't know what to say, she'd compliment someone's choice of wine, ask about hobbies, or comment on something positive about the environment. These small resources kept her confident and light, and this lightness was perceived as charisma, because in the end, charming communication isn't about talking a lot. It's about making others feel good about being around you. Another crucial change was abandoning sarcasm and self-deprecating jokes. Previously, she used humor to disguise insecurities, but realized it diminished her authority. Instead, she began using short, inspiring stories that naturally revealed her strengths. She talked about books she was reading, trips she dreamed of taking, personal projects that excited her. This showed a passion for life, and passion is magnetic, especially for men who live surrounded by jaded and cynical people. The art of creating deep connection, more than just impressing, Isadora wanted to create genuine bonds, and she understood that connection is born from well-measured vulnerability. She began sharing small pieces of her own story, not to seek pity, but to show humanity. She would tell, for example, how she had worked from an early age to pay for her studies, or how she overcame her fear of public speaking. These measured confessions built emotional bridges, because they showed that behind her elegant posture lay a real, strong, and sensitive woman. And this touched even the most hardened hearts. She also began using a technique she called emotional mirroring. She observed a person's mood and matched her energy. If the other person was excited, she matched it. If they were exhausted, she softened her tone and offered calm. This made people feel like she effortlessly got it, and that feeling of understanding is deeply addictive. Many men began seeking her out simply to talk, not out of romantic interest, but because being with her was like breathing fresh air. This new way of communicating completely changed the way she was perceived. She no longer needed to shout to be heard, or show off to be remembered. Her presence spoke before her mouth. And in the world of millionaires, where everyone competes for attention, those who can generate genuine connection become rare, and therefore precious. But to be truly precious, she would have to take the most delicate step of all, becoming indispensable. Becoming indispensable to a powerful man, the woman who adds, does not weigh. Isadora realized early on that winning the attention of a powerful man was just the beginning. The real challenge was remaining in his life, so that he no longer wanted to imagine his days without her. And to do that, she discovered, it wasn't enough to be charming or beautiful. She had to be useful in the noblest sense of the word, to add value. High-value men live surrounded by people who want to receive, but they rarely find someone willing to truly contribute. And when they do, they value them as if they were pure gold. She began by observing behind the scenes. The most successful men she knew were always overwhelmed, with packed schedules, heavy decisions, and constant pressure. They lived in problem-solving mode. So Isadora asked the question that would change everything. How can I make his life easier? This question began to guide her actions. Instead of creating dramas due to lack of attention, she offered welcoming silence when he returned exhausted. Instead of competing for space, she offered strategic support. Do you want me to review that presentation? Or do you want me to organize next week's commitments? Or do you want me to take care of that so you can rest? These gestures seemed small, but they had a huge effect. Because while most people demanded energy from him, she gave it back. And high-performing men are extremely sensitive to this. They distance themselves from those who drain them and cling to those who recharge them. Little by little, he began to seek Isadora out not only in good times, but especially in difficult times. And that's when she understood. Indispensable isn't the one who shines when everything is going well, but the one who remains reliable when everything falls apart. The peace that becomes an addiction. What surprised Isadora most was how he seemed to relax around her. At first, she thought she always had to be fun, interesting, and engaging, until she realized what he craved most was rest. In the competitive world he lived in, everyone wanted his attention, his time, his ideas, except her. With her, he could simply exist. He could be silent, watch a silly movie, walk barefoot on the porch without having to be the big man. This sense of normalcy became his addiction, because for a powerful man, peace is the greatest luxury. Isadora began to intentionally cultivate this sense of refuge. She kept their meetings light. She avoided unnecessary arguments, didn't interrogate, and didn't try to correct his habits. If something bothered her, she waited for the right moment and spoke calmly. She also created small, affectionate rituals. She left encouraging notes in his diary, made his coffee just the way he liked it, and sent short, loving messages between meetings. Nothing over the top, just subtle reminders that he had a safe place amidst the chaos. Interestingly, the more peace she offered, the more he wanted to be around. He began canceling appointments to spend more time with her, inviting her on business trips, and including her in important decisions. And it wasn't out of dependence, but out of preference. Because for a man surrounded by noise, those who bring silence become irreplaceable. Isadora understood that being indispensable isn't about making a lot of noise. It's about being the only place where he can finally be silent, being a partner without losing your own identity. But there was a delicate point Isadora knew she couldn't ignore. Becoming indispensable couldn't mean disappearing into his life. She'd seen too many brilliant women fade away trying to live their partners' lives, only to be discarded, like replaceable accessories, so she decided to hold on to her own essence. She continued with her projects, her friendships, her hobbies. When he asked about her day, she had her own stories to tell, achievements, challenges, plans. And this enchanted him even more, because it showed she was there out of love, not need. She established an invisible balance. She was present, but not overly available. She was supportive, but not a crutch. When he asked for advice, she offered her honest opinion, even if it wasn't what he wanted to hear. And he respected that, because high-value men don't want mirrors that merely reflect their desires. They want partners who challenge them intelligently and support them loyally. Isadora became that rare figure, someone who walked alongside, not behind, who added to his empire, but continued to build her own. This attitude created something no amount of money could buy: admiration. He began to present her with pride, listen to her attentively, defend her in public, and trust her in private. Because he knew that if everything fell apart, she would still be standing. And this solidity is what makes a woman indispensable. Not what she does for him, but what she represents. An anchor, a lighthouse, a mobile home. But there would be no point in being his home if this love didn't stand the test of time. And that's when Isadora had to learn to keep everything alive. Keeping the relationship healthy and lasting love does not stand alone. When Isadora finally realized that her relationship with this powerful man had become a solid part of her life, a new fear began to haunt her. Not that of losing her place, but that of letting the relationship become predictable. Many couples she admired had fallen deeply in love, but then foundered in silence, suffocated by routine and unspoken expectations. She knew it wasn't enough to have earned her place in his heart. Now she needed to cultivate it like one tending a rare garden, one that demands daily attention, even when it seems to flourish on its own. He understood that the first step was to keep her individuality alive. Isadora didn't want to be just a millionaire's wife. She wanted to continue being Isadora, with her opinions, her projects, her goals. She set aside time just for herself. She read new books, took courses, met friends, pursued her hobbies, and she always returned from these experiences with her eyes shining, full of stories to tell. This energy kept her interesting, unpredictable, alive, and for him that was irresistible, because nothing is more seductive than a woman who never stops growing. She also realized the importance of keeping gestures simple. Over time, it's easy to forget the power of a sincere compliment, an unexpected touch, or a note left in a work folder. So she decided to turn small gestures into rituals. She thanked him when he did something for her, even if it was ordinary. She prepared his favorite meal as a surprise. She sent loving messages in the middle of the day. Small but meaningful things like watering a plant. Because love, she discovered, doesn't die from great tragedies. It dies from lack of care. Complicity in turbulent times, living next to a powerful man, also meant dealing with the weight of the world on his shoulders. There were days when he would arrive exhausted, withdrawn, with the distant look of someone who had spent the day putting out fires. Before, Isadora might have interpreted this as coldness, but now she understood. It wasn't personal. It was overwhelm. Instead of demanding immediate presence, she offered space and listened. She waited for him to compose himself, calmly asking if he wanted to talk or just be silent with her. Sometimes they would simply sit together on the porch, saying nothing, and that was enough. This shared silence became a refuge. She also learned to deal with the moments when his success brought external pressures, envious glances, malicious comments, attempts to sabotage her image. Instead of allowing herself to be contaminated by fear or jealousy, she became his emotional shield. She didn't feed gossip. She didn't react to provocations. When someone tried to belittle her by saying she was there only for self-interest, she smiled and carried on, as if she knew she had nothing to prove. This serenity strengthened him, because while the world tried to pull him down, she reminded him that he wasn't alone at the top. There were also the inevitable conflicts between them. Isadora understood that avoiding arguments wasn't a sign of maturity. Resolving them with respect was. So they struck a deal, never to argue in the heat of the moment. When something bothered them, they each wrote it down in a notebook. waited for the heat to settle, and then talked, looking each other in the eye. No yelling, no accusations, just listening and finding solutions. This prevented hurt feelings from becoming walls, and little by little, this ability to weather storms together became the cement of their relationship. They didn't just love each other on good days. They chose each other on bad days, too. Growing together, not just side by side, the greatest lesson Isadora learned, however, was that a lasting relationship doesn't survive stagnation. It requires growth, individually and as a couple. They decided to set goals together, as partners in a life project. They planned trips they'd always dreamed of taking, courses they wanted to take together, social causes to support, investments to build together. They even created a monthly strategy meeting, where they would have candlelit dinners and review dreams, plans, and necessary adjustments. It was fun and profound at the same time. It turned their relationship into a living, breathing organism, constantly expanding. They also cultivated a sense of humor. An ingredient they discovered was as important as passion. They laughed at their own blunders, made inside jokes, and coined silly nicknames. They didn't let the seriousness of the business world erase the lightheartedness between them. This kept them young inside, even on their most serious days. And this lightheartedness was what made them want to return to each other again and again. Not out of obligation, but out of pleasure. Because the love that survives is the one that remains fun. Isadora looked at all of this and understood. The secret wasn't holding on tight so as not to lose. It was letting go a little each day so as to be able to choose again. They weren't together out of necessity but out of desire, and this mutual freedom was what made them unbreakable. Because when two complete beings choose each other daily, time ceases to be an enemy. It becomes an accomplice. But before any woman can experience this kind of love, she must first understand the truths that no one tells her about this path. The choice that changes everything. You can spend your whole life believing this kind of love isn't for you. Or you can decide today that you're going to become the woman a high-value man can't forget. Not because you'll beg for attention, but because you'll learn to shine without asking for the spotlight. The question is, will you keep waiting for someone to recognize your worth, or will you start building it yourself? How many times have you diminished yourself to fit into someone else's life? How many times have you kept quiet to avoid seeming too much? How many opportunities have you missed because you thought you didn't belong? Maybe it's time to prove yourself wrong all along. The love you desire isn't a prize reserved for the few. It's an inevitable consequence for those who choose to live their lives to the fullest. Now tell me, what part of this manual opened your eyes the most? What change are you going to start today? Write it down in the comments. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications, because this is just the first step in your transformation. The woman you want to be is waiting for you to begin.